You know what they say about finding skeletons in your closet? Well, I found mine in the attic, and it was worth $100 million. My name is Nick Carlson, and 3 months ago, I was just another divorced contractor living above a boxing gym in Queens, watching my ex-wife Vanessa parade around Manhattan with her new millionaire husband like she'd won the lottery, which, in a way, she thought she had. Damian Price, tech mogul, penthouse owner, the kind of guy who wears $1,000 watches and thinks it makes him interesting. The kind of guy Vanessa always said I'd never be. "You'll never amount to anything, Nick," she told me during our final fight. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed at my chest like a weapon. "I need a real man. Someone who can provide, someone who matters." That was the day she took Jake and Emily to their new daddy's glass tower in the sky, leaving me with nothing but mortgage payments on a house I couldn't afford and the bitter taste of failure in my mouth. But here's the thing about failure. Sometimes it's just life's way of clearing the deck for something bigger. I was up in the attic of our old house, boxing up the last of my childhood memories before the bank took it all, when I found the briefcase. Hidden behind a stack of moldy Christmas decorations, covered in dust thick enough to write your name in. It had my name on it, actually. A brass nameplate that read, Nicholas James Carlson, an elegant script I'd never seen before. The lock was old but sturdy. I had to use a crowbar from my truck to crack it open, and when I did, the hinges screamed like they'd been holding secrets for decades. Which, as it turned out, they had. Inside was a will, my grandfather's will, dated 30 years ago, along with stock certificates, property deeds, and a letter addressed to me in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards I'd received as a kid. "Dear Nicky," no, it began, and I could almost hear Grandpa Joe's gravelly voice reading the words. "If you're reading this, then the vultures finally got to me, and you're probably wondering why your old man never told you about the money." The money. Jesus Christ, the money. According to the documents, my grandfather hadn't been the broke mechanic everyone thought he was. He'd been the silent partner in a company called Meridian Industries, a manufacturing firm that had grown from a small machine shop into a multi-million-dollar operation. And when he died, he'd left it all to me. Not to my father, not to my uncles, not to anyone else in the family. Just me. The letter explained why. Apparently, the rest of the family had spent years trying to convince Grandpa Joe to sell his share of the company. They wanted quick cash, immediate gratification. But he'd seen something in me, even as a kid. He'd wanted someone who would build something lasting. "Your father and his brothers are good men," the letter continued, "but they think small. You've got something different in your eyes, boy. You see the long game. That's why you're getting everything." Everything. $137 million, plus controlling interest in a company I'd never even heard of. I sat there in that dusty attic, surrounded by the debris of my failed marriage, holding papers that made me richer than Damian Price could ever dream of being. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But the best part? The absolute cherry on top of this cosmic joke? Vanessa had no idea. None of them did. When Grandpa Joe died, the will had been sealed pending my 21st birthday. But by then I was already married to Vanessa and struggling to make ends meet. The lawyers had tried to contact me, but we'd moved 3 times that year, and somehow the letters never found me. For 20 years, I'd been sitting on a fortune and didn't know it. I pulled out my phone and called the law firm listed on the letterhead. Cowley, Morrison and Associates. Somehow they were still in business. "Mr. Carlson?" The receptionist sounded surprised. "We've been trying to reach you for decades. Mr. Cowley will want to speak with you immediately." An hour later, I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled office that smelled like old money and older secrets, across from a man who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Constitution was signed. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," Mr. Cowley said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "He insisted we keep trying to find you, no matter how long it took. Said you'd need the inheritance when the time was right." "And the company?" "Meridian Industries has been held in trust, managed by a board of directors your grandfather appointed. They've done well, very well. The company is now worth approximately $200 million, and you own 60% of it." I did the math. It made my head spin. "There's just one thing," Cowley continued, his expression growing serious. "Your family, they've been trying to contest the will for years. They claim your grandfather was mentally incompetent when he wrote it. They've filed lawsuit after lawsuit, trying to get their hands on the money." "What family?" "Your father's brothers, mostly, and..." He consulted his notes. Your ex-wife's family has also been involved in the legal challenges. Apparently, they believe they had a claim through your marriage. The pieces started falling into place. Vanessa's sudden interest in my family history, the way she'd pushed me to reconcile with my uncles after years of estrangement, the questions about Grandpa Joe's estate that I'd thought were just idle curiosity. She'd known. Maybe not everything, but she'd known something. And when she couldn't get access to it through me, she'd decided to cut me loose and find herself a different meal ticket. Mr. Cowley, I said, leaning forward in my chair, what would it take to claim my inheritance? The old lawyer smiled, and for the first time in months, I smiled back. Just your signature, Mr. Carlson. Just your signature. The next morning, I woke up in my cramped apartment above Murphy's boxing gym feeling like a different man. Not because I was suddenly rich. The money would take weeks to transfer, and the company takeover would be even more complicated. No, I felt different because for the first time in years, I had options. I also had a plan. I called in sick to the construction site where I'd been working, a luxury condo development in Soho that, ironically, I could now afford to buy outright. Then I drove to the one place I knew I'd find Vanessa on a Tuesday morning, the Meridian Spa on the Upper East Side, where she and her girlfriends gathered weekly to gossip and spend Damien's money. The spa was the kind of place that charged $300 for a facial and made you feel grateful for the privilege. All white marble and soft lighting, with the kind of hushed atmosphere that screamed expensive. I walked in wearing my work clothes, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, and watched the receptionist's face go through a series of expressions that would have been comical if they weren't so predictable. Sir, I'm not sure you're in the right place, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of polite disdain they probably taught in finishing school. I'm looking for my ex-wife, I said. Vanessa Price. Tell her Nick Carlson is here to see her. The receptionist's expression shifted to something approaching panic. She'd probably heard stories about crazy ex-husbands causing scenes, which, to be fair, was exactly what I was planning to do. I'll see if she's available, she stammered, reaching for the phone. 5 minutes later, Vanessa emerged from the back of the spa like a queen making an entrance. She was wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly rent and a look of irritation that I remembered well from our marriage. What are you doing here, Nick? She hissed, glancing around to make sure her friends weren't watching. You're embarrassing me. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of Grandpa Joe's will. Because I think you're going to find this very interesting. Her eyes scanned the document, and I watched her face go pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. It was like watching someone realize they'd been playing poker with a marked deck, and they'd been betting on the wrong cards. That's not possible, she whispered. $137 million, Vanessa, plus controlling interest in a company worth another $120 million. Funny thing is, I just found out about it yesterday. Makes you wonder what might have happened if you'd stuck around, doesn't it? She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a quiet corner, her nails digging into my skin. You're lying. Your grandfather was broke. Everyone knows that. Everyone was wrong. I pulled my arm free and straightened my shirt. But here's the really interesting part. Apparently, your family has been trying to get their hands on this money for years. Your brother Danny, specifically. He's been filing lawsuits claiming he had some kind of right to it through our marriage. The color drained from her face completely now. Nick, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain how you knew about money that I didn't even know existed? Can you explain why you spent 2 years pushing me to make nice with my uncles, asking questions about Grandpa Joe's will, going through his old papers when you thought I wasn't looking? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once in her life, Vanessa was speechless. You married me thinking I was going to inherit money, I continued. And when you couldn't get access to it fast enough, you decided to trade up to a sure thing. Damien Price with his tech millions and his penthouse view. Except here's the thing, sweetheart. I'm worth more than he is. I'm worth more than both of you combined. Nick, please. The best part? The absolute best part is that if you'd just been patient, if you'd just been a decent wife and mother, you would have had access to all of it. We'd have been set for life. Our kids would have been set for life. But you got greedy and you got stupid, and now you get nothing. I could see her mind racing, trying to find an angle, a way to salvage this. It was almost pathetic. The kids, she said finally. Jake and Emily are still your children. Surely you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Take care of my own kids? Of course I will. But you? You made your choice. You chose Damien and his money over your own family. I hope it was worth it. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. She was standing there in her expensive workout clothes, in her expensive spa, surrounded by all the trappings of the life she'd thought she wanted. And she looked smaller somehow, diminished. Oh, and Vanessa, you might want to call your brother Danny and tell him to drop those lawsuits. Because as of tomorrow, I'm going to start fighting back. And I've got a lot more money for lawyers than he does. I walked out of that spa feeling 10 feet tall, but I wasn't done. Not even close. My next stop was Meridian Industries itself. The company headquarters were in a gleaming office tower in Midtown, the kind of building where serious money got made by serious people. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor and then walked into a reception area that looked like something out of a magazine. I'm here to see the board of directors, I told the receptionist. My name is Nicholas Carlson. The effect was immediate. The young woman's eyes went wide and she practically jumped out of her chair. Mr. Carlson. Yes, sir, right away. They've been expecting you. Expecting me? That was interesting. 5 minutes later, I was sitting at the head of a conference table, surrounded by 6 of the most expensive-looking people I'd ever seen. They were all older, all impeccably dressed, and all looking at me like I was either their salvation or their worst nightmare. Mr. Carlson, said a woman with silver hair and a handshake that could crack walnuts, I'm Margaret Chen, the current chairman of the board. We've been hoping to meet you for a very long time. Have you? Your grandfather left very specific instructions about what should happen when you claimed your inheritance, said a man with a Texas drawl and a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He wanted you to have complete control of the company, but he also wanted to make sure you understood what you were inheriting. For the next 2 hours, they walked me through everything: financial reports, market analyses, growth projections. Meridian Industries wasn't just successful, it was a juggernaut. They manufactured precision components for aerospace companies, medical device makers, and tech firms around the world. They had contracts with NASA, Boeing, Apple, and a dozen other companies I'd actually heard of. The company employs over 3,000 people across 12 facilities, Margaret explained. Annual revenue last year was $460 million. Net profit was $87 million. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. This wasn't just money, this was power. Real, substantial, change your life and everyone else's power. What about the lawsuits? I asked. The board members exchanged glances. Your uncles have been persistent, Margaret said diplomatically. They've claimed that your grandfather was suffering from dementia when he wrote the will, that he was unduly influenced by outside parties, that the will itself was fraudulent. Every claim has been thoroughly investigated and dismissed, but they keep trying new approaches. And my ex-wife's family? Daniel Morrison, your former brother-in-law, has claimed that as your wife, Vanessa should have had community property rights to the inheritance. He's also claimed that you deliberately concealed assets during your divorce proceedings. I laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the polished conference room. Kind of hard to conceal assets I didn't know I had. That's exactly what our legal team has argued, but Mr. Morrison has been creative in his interpretations of the law. Well, I said, standing up and straightening my flannel shirt, I think it's time to get creative right back. The first thing I did with my newfound wealth was hire the best lawyer in New York. Not the most expensive, though Leonard Kowalski certainly wasn't cheap, but the best. The kind of lawyer who'd made his reputation destroying people who thought they were untouchable. Your case is fascinating, Lenny said, reviewing the files in his corner office overlooking Central Park. Your grandfather was clearly a shrewd man. The way he structured this will, the safeguards he put in place, it's virtually bulletproof. What about the family challenges? Nuisance suits, mostly. Your uncles don't have a leg to stand on legally, but they've been hoping to wear down the estate with legal fees. As for your ex-brother-in-law, Lenny smiled, the kind of smile that made opposing counsel break out in cold sweats. Daniel Morrison is about to learn the difference between maltreatment and litigation. Within a week, Lenny had filed countersuits against my uncles for frivolous litigation and against Danny Morrison for attempted fraud. But that was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. I started by taking my rightful place at Meridian Industries. The board meeting where I officially assumed control was held on a Thursday morning in the same conference room where they'd first explained my inheritance. This time, though, I wasn't wearing work clothes. I'd bought a suit, a good one, and had my hair cut by someone who charged more than I used to make in a day. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret Chen announced, I'd like to formally introduce Nicholas Carlson, our new majority owner and chairman of the board. The applause was polite, but genuine. These people had been waiting 20 years for this moment, holding the company in trust for a man they'd never met. Now that I was here, they seemed relieved. Thank you, I said. Cute, I said, standing at the head of the table where my grandfather's portrait watched over us all. I know this transition has been a long time coming, and I appreciate your patience. I also want you to know that I don't plan to make any dramatic changes to the company's operations. You've all done an exceptional job growing this business, and I'm not about to mess with success. There were visible sighs of relief around the table. However, I continued, there are some personal matters I need to address. Some people have been trying to claim ownership of assets that don't belong to them. I want to make it clear that this company will use every legal resource at its disposal to protect what's ours. After the meeting, I walked through the offices, introducing myself to employees, learning about the business that was now mine. It was surreal. All these people working for a company I owned, creating products I'd never heard of, generating wealth I was still trying to comprehend. But the real satisfaction came that evening, when I drove to the penthouse building where Vanessa was living her new life. The doorman tried to stop me, but I'd learned something about money in the past week. It opens doors, literally in this case. I'm here to see my children, I told him, handing him a business card that identified me as chairman of Meridian Industries. Jake and Emily Carlson. The doorman's attitude changed immediately. Of course, sir. I'll call up right away. 5 minutes later, I was standing in an elevator that cost more than most people's cars, riding up to the penthouse, where my family was living without me. Damien answered the door. He was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that screamed insecurity. His handshake was firm but sweaty, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Nick? He said, trying to sound casual. Good to finally meet you. The kids are in their rooms doing homework. Actually, I said, stepping into the apartment, I wanted to talk to you and Vanessa first. The penthouse was everything I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that looked uncomfortable, art that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was the kind of place that was designed to impress rather than to live in. Vanessa emerged from what looked like a home office, and I could see she'd been crying. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her hands were shaking. Nick, she said, we need to talk. Yes, we do. I settled into one of their uncomfortable modern chairs and looked around the room. Nice place. Very sterile. Damien sat down across from me, trying to project confidence. Look, Nick, I know this situation is awkward, but I want you to know that I care about Jake and Emily. I'm trying to be a good stepfather. Are you? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken that morning, the Meridian Industries logo on the side of our corporate headquarters. Because I'm trying to be a good father, and part of that means making sure my children understand the value of honesty. Vanessa's face went white. Nick, please, did you tell Damien about the inheritance, Vanessa? Did you explain to your new husband that you married me because you thought I was going to inherit money? And you divorced me because you got tired of waiting for it? Damien's head snapped toward Vanessa. What is he talking about? It's not like that, Vanessa stammered. Isn't it? I stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights below. Because I've been doing some research, and it turns out your brother Danny has been very busy. Lawsuits, legal challenges, attempts to claim community property rights to an inheritance that didn't even exist yet. Funny thing is, he seems to have known a lot about my grandfather's will, more than I knew, certainly. I turned back to face them. Damien was staring at Vanessa like he was seeing her for the first time. You want to know the really ironic part? I continued. If Vanessa had just been patient, if she'd just been a good wife and mother, she would have had access to more money than you'll ever see, Damien. But she got greedy, she got impatient, and now she gets nothing. How much money are we talking about? Damien asked quietly. About $250 million, give or take. The silence in the room was deafening. Damien slowly turned to look at Vanessa, and I could see the exact moment when he realized what she'd cost him. You knew, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't know for sure, Vanessa said desperately. Danny thought there might be something, but we didn't know how much or when. You married me as a backup plan, Damien said, his voice getting louder. You divorced him because you thought I was richer, but you were hedging your bets in case the inheritance came through. That's exactly what it was, I interrupted, and now you've lost both bets. I walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Damien, you might want to know that Vanessa's been in contact with her divorce lawyer. Apparently, she's been asking about prenups and how to get around them. Just thought you should know. The last thing I heard as I left was Damien's voice raised in anger, and Vanessa's voice raised in panic. It was music to my ears. But I wasn't done yet, not even close. The hardest part about being betrayed by your wife is realizing how many other people were in on it. Over the next few days, as I started to piece together the full scope of what had happened, I began to understand that Vanessa hadn't been working alone. It started with a phone call from my old friend Mike Sullivan. Mike and I had been buddies since high school, and he'd been my best man at my wedding. He was also Vanessa's cousin, which should have been my first clue. Nick, buddy, we need to talk, he said, his voice carrying that false casualness that meant trouble. Can you meet me at Flanagan's tonight? Flanagan's was our old hangout, a dive bar in Queens where we'd spent countless nights drinking beer and solving the world's problems. It seemed fitting that it would be the place where our friendship finally died. I got there first and ordered a whiskey. I had a feeling I was going to need it. Mike showed up 20 minutes later with two other guys I recognized, Tommy Chen and Dave Rodriguez, both old friends from the neighborhood. They all looked uncomfortable, like they were attending a funeral, which in a way they were. So, I said as they settled into the booth across from me, let me guess, Vanessa sent you. Mike had the grace to look embarrassed. It's not like that, Nick, isn't it? Because I'm betting she told you about the inheritance, and now you're all here to convince me to do the right thing and share it with her. Tommy leaned forward. Look, Nick, we've all been friends for 20 years. Vanessa made mistakes, sure, but she's still the mother of your kids. And she's family. Family. I laughed and took another sip of whiskey. You know what's funny about family, Tommy? I just found out that my actual family, my uncles, my cousins, have been trying to steal from me for decades. And my wife's family has been helping them do it. Dave shifted uncomfortably. We heard about the lawsuits. That's messed up, man. But that doesn't mean you should take it out on Vanessa. Take it out on her? I set my glass down hard enough to make the other patrons look over. She knew, Dave. She knew about the inheritance, or at least suspected it, and she married me to get access to it. When she couldn't get it fast enough, she traded up to Damian Price, and all of you knew what was happening. The three of them exchanged glances. Mike cleared his throat. We knew she was unhappy. Bees. I leaned back in my seat. You knew she was working with her brother to try to claim my inheritance. You knew she was asking questions about my grandfather's will, going through his papers, pushing me to reconcile with my uncles so she could get information about the estate. And none of you said a word to me. We didn't think, Tommy started. You didn't think what? That I deserved to know my own wife was planning to divorce me? That I deserved to know she was only interested in my potential inheritance? The silence stretched out between us like a chasm. Finally, Mike spoke up. Look, Nick, maybe we should have said something, but you have to understand, Vanessa was desperate. You guys were struggling financially, the marriage was falling apart, and she was scared about the future, so she decided to secure her future by betraying me. She made mistakes, Dave said, but she's trying to make things right now. She wants to work something out, maybe split the inheritance. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sheer audacity of it was almost admirable. Split the inheritance, I repeated. The inheritance that she has no legal claim to. The inheritance that she tried to steal through fraudulent lawsuits. The inheritance that she would have had access to anyway if she'd just been a decent wife. She's the mother of your children, Tommy said again. Yes, she is, and my children will be taken care of. They'll have trust funds that will set them up for life. They'll go to the best schools, have every opportunity money can buy. But Vanessa? I stood up and threw a 20 on the table. Vanessa made her choice. She chose Damien and his money over her own family. She can live with the consequences. I started to leave, then turned back to face them one more time. And just so we're clear, gentlemen, this friendship is over. All of you knew what was happening and chose to protect her instead of me. You're not my friends. You never were. You were her spies. Mike stood up, his face flushing red. That's not fair, Nick. We've been friends since we were kids. Friends don't lie to each other, Mike. Friends don't help your wife plot against you. Friends don't come to a bar and try to guilt you into giving away money that was stolen from you in the first place. You're being unreasonable, Dave said. This money is changing you, man. You're not the same guy we grew up with. You're right, I said. Well, I'm not. The guy you grew up with was naive enough to trust people who didn't deserve it. The guy you grew up with let people walk all over him because he thought that's what friendship meant. But that guy is gone. I looked at each of them one more time. The new guy fights back. I walked out of Flanagan's and never looked back. But as I drove home, I realized that losing those friendships hurt more than I'd expected. It's one thing to discover that your wife betrayed you. Marriages end, people change, life goes on. But finding out that your oldest friends were complicit in that betrayal, that cut deeper than I'd thought possible. The next morning, I called Lenny. I want to know everything, I told him. Everyone who knew about the inheritance, everyone who was involved in the lawsuits, everyone who helped Vanessa gather information about my grandfather's estate. I want names, dates, documentation, all of it. That's going to be expensive, Lenny warned. I can afford it. Within a week, Lenny's investigators had assembled a comprehensive report that read like a conspiracy thriller. Vanessa's brother Danny had been the ringleader, filing lawsuit after lawsuit trying to establish some claim to my inheritance. But he hadn't been working alone. My uncles, my father's brothers, had been feeding him information about my grandfather's business dealings, hoping to get a cut of whatever Danny managed to extract from the estate. Vanessa had been their inside source, gathering intelligence about my family history, my grandfather's papers, anything that might help build their case. And my so-called friends had been helping her do it. Mike had introduced Vanessa to a private investigator who specialized in inheritance disputes. Tommy had helped her search through old family documents when I wasn't home. Dave had even driven her to meetings with Danny's lawyers. They'd all been working together, a coordinated effort to separate me from money I didn't even know I had. The only reason they'd failed was that my grandfather had been smarter than all of them combined. But now I knew the truth. And now I could do something about it. The confrontation came sooner than I'd expected. I was leaving the Meridian Industries building after a board meeting when I saw them waiting for me on the sidewalk. Mike, Tommy, and Dave, looking like they'd been there for hours. We need to talk, Mike said as I approached. No, I said, not breaking stride. We don't. Tommy stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Come on, Nick. This has gone far enough. I stopped and looked at him, really looked at him. Tommy Chen had been my friend for 20 years. We'd been in each other's weddings, celebrated each other's successes, commiserated over each other's failures, and the whole time he'd been lying to me. You helped her search through my grandfather's papers, I said quietly. Tommy's face went pale. How did you? I know everything, Tommy. The private investigator, the meetings with Danny's lawyers, the coordination with my uncles, all of it. Dave stepped forward. Look, maybe we made some mistakes, but we were trying to help. Help who? Because you sure as hell weren't trying to help me. We were trying to help your family, Mike said. Vanessa was scared, Nick. She didn't know what was going to happen to her and the kids if your marriage fell apart. She was just trying to secure their future by stealing from me. It wasn't stealing, Tommy protested. It was community property. She had a right. She had no rights to money I didn't even know existed. I was shouting now, and people on the sidewalk were starting to stare. She married me thinking I was going to inherit something. And when it didn't happen fast enough, she decided to take matters into her own hands. That's not how it happened, Dave said, isn't it? I pulled out my phone and showed them a document Lenny had uncovered. This is a contract between Vanessa and the private investigator you introduced her to, Mike. Dated 2 years ago, 2 years before she filed for divorce. She was planning this for a long time. Mike stared at the document, his face going white. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. None of you did. You just went along with whatever she asked because she was family, or because she was pretty, or because you thought I was a loser who didn't deserve better. That's not true, Tommy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Here's what's going to happen, I said, putting my phone away. You're going to leave me alone. All of you. You're going to stop calling, Stop texting. Stop showing up at my workplace. You're going to pretend I don't exist, the same way you pretended not to notice what Vanessa was doing to me. Nick, come on, Mike pleaded. We've been friends forever. No, I said. Well, we haven't. Friends don't do what you did. Friends don't help your wife plot against you. Friends don't lie to your face for years while helping someone steal from you. I started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and guys, you might want to distance yourselves from Danny Morrison and his legal troubles because my lawyers are going after everyone who was involved in this conspiracy. And I mean everyone. I left them standing there on the sidewalk, three grown men who looked like they'd just realized they'd bet on the wrong horse. It should have felt satisfying, but mostly it just felt empty. That night, I sat in my apartment above the boxing gym, looking out at the city lights and thinking about friendship, loyalty, and betrayal. I'd lost my wife, my kids were living with another man, and my oldest friends had turned out to be enemies. But I had something else now. I had power, real power. The kind of power that could change lives, destroy enemies, and reshape the world according to my will. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks later, everything came to a head at the charity gala. It was Vanessa's idea, of course. The Children's Future Foundation benefit at the Plaza Hotel, with tickets starting at $5,000 a plate. She'd organized it as a way to establish herself in New York high society, to show everyone that she and Damien belonged among the city's elite. She'd also invited me. The invitation arrived at my office on Meridian Industries letterhead. She'd clearly done her homework and found out where I was working. The note was handwritten in her careful script. Nick, I think it's time we put the past behind us and focus on what's best for Jake and Emily. Please come. We need to talk. V. I almost threw it away. But then I realized what she was really doing. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a power play. She was trying to show me that she'd moved on, that she was living her best life, that I couldn't touch her in her new world of wealth and privilege. She had no idea how wrong she was. I bought a table, not just tickets, an entire table for 10 at $25,000. Then I invited the Meridian Industries Board of Directors to be my guests. Margaret Chen, the steel-haired chairman who'd been running my company for 20 years. Robert Hayes, the Texas oil man who'd helped grow the business into an international powerhouse. Sarah Goldman, the former Goldman Sachs executive who managed our investment portfolio. These weren't just successful people. They were the kind of people who made other successful people feel inadequate. Old money, real power, the kind of influence that couldn't be bought or faked. The night of the gala, I arrived at the plaza in a car that cost more than most people's houses. Not because I needed to show off, but because I wanted Vanessa to understand exactly what she'd given up. The ballroom was everything I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers, gold fixtures, and enough flowers to supply a small wedding. The crowd was New York society at its most polished. Tech moguls, real estate developers, hedge fund managers, and the kind of people who appeared in the society pages of the Times. I spotted Vanessa immediately. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, standing next to Damien and laughing at something a man in a tuxedo had said. She looked beautiful, confident, and completely in her element. She also looked surprised when she saw me. I made my way through the crowd, stopping to shake hands and make small talk with people who suddenly wanted to know me now that they'd heard about Meridian Industries. Word travels fast in New York's business community, and everyone knew about the mysterious heir who'd inherited a $250 million company. Nick, Vanessa said as I approached her table. Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the tension around her eyes. I'm so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said, kissing her cheek in the kind of polite gesture that fooled exactly no one. Vanessa, you look lovely. Damien's handshake was firmer this time, more confident. He'd clearly decided to assert himself as the alpha male in this situation. Nick, good to see you again. I hear congratulations are in order, quite an inheritance. Thank you, it's been enlightening. I looked around their table and recognized most of the faces. Damien's business associates, a few people from Vanessa's new social circle, and my old friend Mike Sullivan, who was apparently still in Vanessa's orbit. Mike avoided my eyes, but I nodded to him anyway. Mike, how's the private investigation business these days? His face went red, but before he could answer, Margaret Chen appeared at my elbow. Nick, she said in her crisp British accent, are you going to introduce us to your friends? Of course. Margaret Chen, I'd like you to meet my ex-wife, Vanessa Price, and her husband Damien. Vanessa, Damien. This is Margaret Chen, chairman of the board at Meridian Industries. I watched Vanessa's face as she processed what that meant. Margaret Chen wasn't just some business associate. She was one of the most powerful women in New York finance, the kind of person Vanessa had always dreamed of meeting. Ms. Chen, Vanessa said, extending her hand. It's such a pleasure. I've heard so much about Meridian Industries. Have you? Margaret's smile was polite but cold. How interesting. Nick has told us quite a lot about you as well. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Margaret and the other board members being perfectly polite and absolutely devastating. They didn't insult Vanessa directly. They were too sophisticated for that. Instead, they simply made it clear that they knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. When dinner was served, I excused myself and walked to the podium. The evening's program called for remarks from the foundation's major donors, and as the purchaser of a $25,000 table, I qualified. Good evening, I said, tapping the microphone. For those who don't know me, I'm Nick Carlson, chairman of Meridian Industries. I wanted to say a few words about the importance of family, loyalty, and the choices we make. I could see Vanessa's face from the podium. She looked like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. 3 months ago, I discovered that my grandfather had left me a substantial inheritance, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, built through decades of hard work and careful planning. But more than that, he left me a lesson about the difference between people who build things and people who just want to take them. The room was completely silent now. This wasn't the usual charity gala speech about giving back to the community. You see, there are people in this world who create value, who build businesses, who take risks and work hard to make something lasting. And then there are people who just want to benefit from other people's work without contributing anything themselves. I looked directly at Vanessa. She was pale now, her hands gripping the edge of the table. My grandfather understood this distinction. That's why he left his life's work to someone he trusted to continue building, rather than to people who just wanted to cash out and spend the money. I paused, letting that sink in. The foundation we're supporting tonight is about giving children opportunities, the chance to build something meaningful with their lives, rather than just taking from others. It's about teaching the next generation the difference between earning something and simply feeling entitled to it. The applause was polite but confused. People weren't sure what they'd just heard, but they sensed it was more than a typical charity speech. As I returned to my table, I passed Vanessa's table one more time. She was staring at me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. Nicely done, Margaret Chen murmured as I sat down. Subtle, but effective. But I wasn't finished yet. After dinner, as people mingled and the auction began, I found myself face to face with Danny Morrison, Vanessa's brother. He was drunk, angry, and apparently ready for a confrontation. You think you're pretty smart, don't you? He slurred, stepping too close to me. Coming here, showing off your money, making speeches. Danny, I said calmly, you should probably go home. You stole that money, he continued, loud enough for people nearby to hear. That inheritance should have been shared with the family. Your grandfather was senile when he wrote that will. Actually, said a voice behind me, he wasn't. I turned to see an elderly man I didn't recognize, distinguished looking with white hair and an expensive suit. Dr. Harrison Whitmore, the man said, extending his hand. I was your grandfather's physician for the last 15 years of his life. I couldn't help but overhear this gentleman's comments about senility. Danny's face went white. Your grandfather, Dr. Whitmore continued, was one of the sharpest men I ever knew, right up until the day he died. I have extensive medical records documenting his mental acuity. In fact, I was one of the witnesses to his will. The small crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was now listening intently. Danny looked like he wanted to disappear. Furthermore, Dr. Whitmore said, I remember your grandfather mentioning that certain family members were pressuring him to change his will, to divide his assets among people who hadn't earned them. He was quite disappointed by their greed. Danny turned and walked away without another word. The crowd dispersed, but not before several people approached me to shake hands and offer their congratulations on my inheritance. The final moment came as the evening was winding down. I was standing on the hotel's terrace, looking out at Central Park, when Vanessa appeared beside me. You planned all of this, she said quietly. Did I? The speech, the doctor showing up. even bringing your board of directors. You orchestrated this whole evening to humiliate me. I turned to look at her. In the soft light from the ballroom, she looked younger, more like the woman I'd married 20 years ago. You invited me, Vanessa. You said you wanted to put the past behind us. I wanted to find a way to work together for the kids' sake. The kids will be fine. They're going to have trust funds worth more money than most people see in a lifetime. They'll go to the best schools, have every opportunity, but that was always going to happen, whether you were in the picture or not. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city lights. I made mistakes, she said finally. Yes, you did. I was scared, Nick. We were struggling, the marriage was falling apart, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me and the children. So you decided to steal from me. I didn't know for sure there was anything to steal. Danny thought there might be an inheritance, but we didn't know how much or when. You knew enough to hire a private investigator. You knew enough to go through my grandfather's papers. You knew enough to coordinate with my uncles and file fraudulent lawsuits. She didn't deny it. The thing is, Vanessa, if you'd just been patient, if you'd just been a good wife and mother, you would have had access to all of it. We'd have been set for life. And if you'd been a better husband, I was a good husband. I worked hard, I was faithful, I put my family first. The only thing I didn't do was make enough money fast enough to satisfy your ambitions. We stood there in silence for a while, two people who'd once loved each other, now separated by betrayal and greed and choices that couldn't be undone. What happens now? She asked. Now you live with the consequences of your choices. You married Damien for his money, so you'd better hope he doesn't find out about the prenup investigation you've been conducting. Her head snapped toward me. How did you? I know everything, Vanessa. Everything. I started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at her one more time. You know what the really sad part is? I would have forgiven you. Even after everything you did, if you'd just been honest with me, if you'd admitted your mistakes and tried to make things right, I might have found a way to forgive you. And now? Now it's too late. I walked back into the ballroom, leaving her alone on the terrace with her regrets and her expensive dress and her new life that was already starting to crumble around her. 6 months later, Damien filed for divorce. Apparently, he had discovered that Vanessa had been investigating ways to break their prenup, and he'd decided he didn't want to be married to someone who was already planning their divorce. My uncles settled their lawsuits for nuisance payments that barely covered their legal fees. Danny Morrison was facing fraud charges and had lost his job at the law firm where he'd been a partner. Mike, Tommy, and Dave had all tried to reach out to me, but I never returned their calls. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. As for me, I threw myself into running Meridian Industries, learning the business my grandfather had built, expanding into new markets, creating jobs, building something lasting. The company was thriving, my children were doing well in school, and I was finally living the life I was meant to live. But the best part, the absolute best part, was the letter I received from Jake on his 18th birthday. Dad, it read, I know things have been complicated with Mom and everything that happened, but I want you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. She was wrong to treat you the way she did, and I'm proud that you stood up for yourself. I can't wait to work with you at Meridian Industries after college. Love, Jake. I sat in my office reading that letter over and over, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd truly won. Revenge. It turns out, isn't just about making your enemies pay for what they did to you. It's about building something better than what they tried to take away. And I had built something better, something lasting, something that would outlive all of us.